will be moderating this session. And so without further ado, Tracy, I'm going to pass it over to you, and on you go.
Thank you, Marian. Thanks everyone for joining us today on behalf of the committee. Like Marian said, there's a whole group of us that put the forum together. So we want to thank everybody for attending. As Marian had mentioned, I'm just going to give you a little overview of the session today. Basically, it's going to look at identifying the processes, structures, and characteristics that nurture innovation, the factors frequently found in agencies that inhibit innovation, and specific actions that managers at all levels can take to build a pervasive culture for innovation in parks and recreation departments and other recreation service delivery groups. So today our presenter is John Crompton. John holds the rank of the University Distinguished Professor and is both a Regents Professor and a Presidential Professor for Teaching Excellence at Texas A&M University. His undergraduate work was in physical education and geography at Loughborough College. After teaching high school for a year, he attended the University of Illinois, where he completed a master's degree in recreation and parks and administration. He earned another master's degree from Loughborough University, majoring in business administration, and he also received his doctorate in recreation resources development. John currently teaches exclusively at the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Sciences. John was a member of the NRPA's Board of Trustees for 9 years and is a past president of 4 professional bodies: the Texas Recreation Park Society, the American Academy of Parks and Recreation Administration, the Society of Parks and Recreation Educators, and the Academy of Leisure Services. John is also currently a board member of the National Recreation Foundation. At this time, I'd like to welcome John to the presentation, and I look forward to hearing from him. John?
All right, we'll try to get our technology up here, and looks like we're there. We're going to a screen save, and we're ready to go. Are we here? I'm working with my good technician here to try to get us organized, and I think we're ready to go. Marian, Tracy, thank you. It's always a privilege to interact with good folks north of the border. I'm disappointed I don't get to visit north of the border, because it's really nice periodically to go back to a world of civilization. Texas has a lot of things going for it, which is why I'm here, but nobody ever accused us of being civilized. And so I miss not actually being up there. But it is what it is. And so I want to start out with this slide. And sometime, as you know, we have a crisis right now. And as I was talking about this in class one time with one of my graduate students from China, and he said, well, Dr. Crompton, in China, we write crisis with 2 symbols. And he wrote these out for me. Obviously, that's not my handwriting. And he said, the first symbol means danger, and the second means opportunity. And together in Chinese, he told me, they mean crisis. And so danger means we are threatened. And because we are threatened, we have to do things differently. And that, in the Chinese term, is opportunity. And I think we can agree that the future of this field is going to be different. And perhaps change is the only constant that we're going to see in future years, because clearly the environment has changed. And so our good friend Charles Darwin, when he wrote The Origin of Species, observed it is not the strongest or most intelligent who will survive, but those who are most adaptable to change. And I think that applies to us in the parks and recreation field, as well as it did to him in the terms of Origin of Species. And so this presentation is about, are we designed to capitalize on the opportunities for innovation that we have? Now, innovation, that crisis of innovation, really comes from 3 potential sources. Firstly, a shift in political direction. And I should mention at this time that I am a member of the College Station City Council, and have served now for 5 years on that council. We're a city of 120,000. There are 7 of us. We run citywide. We have 1,000 full-time employees. For that, I receive 0 remuneration and an awful lot of hassle and fuss and whatever, but it sort of does put an element of reality in my world. So if there's a shift in political direction, you have to respond to it. If there's a direction from above by senior manager, you have to respond to it. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm concerned about is innovation that we as professionals generate, and we are the source of that innovation. And so when I talk about innovation, what are we talking about? That's my first question. Well, there are several dimensions of it. First, it might be creating a new idea or a better way of performing an existing function. That actually is relatively rare. There are very few really new ideas in this field. Most of the time what we do is what I call, we put old wine in new bottles. In other words, we adapt ideas or we adopt ideas in our organization, but they've been available elsewhere. They've been best practice elsewhere. And so that is innovation in my terms because it's new to my organization. And so that makes it, as far as I'm concerned, an innovative practice and meets my criteria today. And then, of course, technology, of course, can generate innovations, and that speaks for itself. Personal enhancements, if we up morale in several ways, we reduce turnover, we create slack, and more about that later, and we improve our working conditions. All of those are potential innovations which can boost our programmatic efforts. And so, why is innovation important? Well, for that, I need to go back to 40 years ago when I first introduced the notion of program life cycles to this field. And you will recall program life cycle. It says at the beginning, it takes a while to get things off the ground. And then there's a takeoff phase when a new program grows somewhat exponentially. And then the growth rate levels off in the maturation phase. In the saturation phase, it levels out. And then at the end of the saturation phase, there's really 3 ways to go. First, we can adapt we can extend it by putting it to a new target market or shifting the emphasis of the program or changing the program in some way. And it may grow up to bigger and bigger heights. More likely, it will decline. And most programs don't die. They don't have a sudden death. They what I call petrify. They just sort of hang in there and toddle along. And it's those programs which I'm going to speak in some depth about later. Recently, I was at a state park system visiting with a new state park director, a new director for that state park system. And here's what he said. He said, "Our state park system is a collection of tired and worn out resources staffed by a collection of tired and worn out people." In other words, he's at the petrification stage. Now, many times, if I just go back to that diagram a little bit, when I go into an agency, I plot where their program's on. You can see along the horizontal axis is time, and up on the vertical axis, I have typically number of participants. And if it's, obviously, if this thing is constrained by a capacity in a room, then it doesn't work. But outside of that, I plot the life cycles. And invariably, ladies and gentlemen, you find that most of the programs that an agency offers are at the saturation or the depetrification stage, somewhere in that right-hand side of that diagram. Now, an agency by definition, its viability is the summation and aggregation of its programs. And so if most of your programs are out there, then that says a lot about the potential dangers of losing viability of your agency. And so we've talked about what we're talking about. and I've emphasized why it's important. So then we go to, well, if this is such an obvious and needed idea, then why do so few agencies have what I call a pervasive innovation culture? And that's what I'm concerned about today. Well, the answer is straightforward. It is that all of us have a lot to be doing on any particular day. Invariably, we feel overwhelmed. We are cognitively aware that indeed we should be putting some effort into new programs. But the reality of our day is that we don't have time to do that. And so the only way that you really get innovation through your agency is to make it accountable. It's the old aphorism in this field: expect what you inspect. If you don't inspect something, then don't expect it to happen. You have to audit these kinds of things. And so new programs, innovation is eminently puttable, offable. You don't have to do it unless you build it into performance reviews, unless you require it to happen, structure it to happen. It won't happen organically. You have to create a structure for it. And I'm reminded of Walmart Corporation. Every year, they require their vendors to go in to talk to them about putting their product on the shelves in the next year. And they call it their +1 program. Every vendor, when the company comes in to talk to the Walmart buyers, knows they're going to be asked, give me the one thing you're doing new with this product this year. Are you changing the price, changing the colors, changing the materials, changing the shape? What are you doing new? And they expect every year to be something that is new. And so if we don't build that kind of requirement in, then yes, we know we should be doing it, but we won't. And our environment, as we all know, is changing, and quite rapidly it's changing now. And it's easy for us all to lapse into what I call a complacency mindset. We do things like we've always done, we let them roll, that's our daily job, and things roll along. And so essentially, we drive into the future while looking out of the rear view mirror. I took that quote from Marshall McLuhan. I like the next one. Waltz faster, Johann, they're playing a tango. The environment has totally changed, but we're still doing what we always did. And Peter Drucker, who is probably the most influential thinker in the management world in the last half of the 20th century, noted, we are long on yesterday's breadwinners, those that are in the maturation decline phase of their product life cycle. We're short on tomorrow's breadwinners, and that's typical. The environment changes around us. We have to adapt to that environment. You know, I was at an agency not too long ago, which had a lot of golf courses, and golf's a prime example of this. You know, golf in the United States is a disaster area. The golf, we have a 25% drop in people playing golf over the last decade. I mean, it's dropping off all over. There are 400 golf courses for sale in America right now, and that number is growing. Golf is a disaster. Well, why? Well, the answer is the environment's changed. You know, golf, you need, if you're going to play an 18-hole course, you need 3 hours around the course, an hour to get there, an hour coming back, you need 5 hours. And probably 20 years ago, you could say to your wife, honey, on Saturday, I'm going to play golf for 5 hours. Well, the best of luck doing that today. That ain't going to happen. It just doesn't fit people's lifestyles to do that. Golf courses believed that the tougher they made them, the more rigorous they were, the more more times they would end up on the best courses in the area list, and that would be good for them. Well, they got it wrong. The average golfer does not want to say, I scored 103 going around today. It's utterly frustrating. The average golfer wants something that he or she can get round in easily. It's totally out of kilter with what golfers want. And you look at the cost of golf today, because they've got these long courses and they're totally manicured and they've got all this stuff on them, it's extraordinarily costly to keep them. So nothing works for golf. So why are we still, playing on 18 holes on championship courses and whatever? If you were starting golf today, would you do that? No, you'd start on 9-hole courses and you make them easier and whatever. But I think it struck me as I was going at this agency, here's a classic example of a complacency mindset where the environment's moved on and we have not adapted with it. In another example, I was driving up from Houston a few months ago, and it's about an 80-mile drive from Houston Airport, and I passed a sign on the freeway just outside of Houston, and it said, the world's largest cricket complex. This gentleman had purchased 120 acres and was building 16 cricket fields in Houston, Texas. Huh? Well, the environment's changed. Houston now is not filled, but it has a large population of people from the subcontinent, from Indian, Pakistani, Bangladesh, and so on, Australia, New Zealand. A lot of these people, and the environment's changed. This gentleman has seen the climate's changed. I need to adapt to it. And so we have to adapt to this changing environment if we are going to remain viable. And so this quote from the head of corporate R&D at General Electric, the third largest corporation in America. It does not matter what kinds of highly promising new ideas the company develops in the laboratory. If the overall climate for innovation throughout the organization is not there, then even the best ideas will not reach the economic mainstream. You've got to have the climate. And so when I go into an organization, when people are kind enough to invite me in, I ask 3 questions to get a feel for how innovative it is. The first question is, number 1, how much market research do we do? And then the answer to that question generally is not much. Now, I'm not talking about fancy surveys with consultants and all this stuff. I'm by profession a social scientist, and I can tell you I have no faith these days in surveys at all. And we can talk about that as a separate issue if you so wish, but most of the time they're just as likely to misdirect as they are to inform. What I'm talking about is getting stakeholders together, talking to them, and I'll elaborate upon that in a little further along. So how much market research? Very little. Well, if you don't do market research, how can you possibly be relevant? Second question I ask is, why do you do what you do today? Most of the time, the answer is because that's what we're trained in. That's our comfort area. That's what we've always done. And you will notice the answers are inward looking. They're not outward looking, responding to what customers' needs are. We do what we've done, what we're comfortable with. My third key question when I go into these agencies, what are you doing different from 5 years ago? One of the things I do is I ask them before I go in, could you please send me your recreation brochures for the last, for 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and if you've got them 20 years ago. And I do a content analysis of the brochures and then share the results with them. And many times they're doing pretty much the same things they were doing certainly 5 years ago, and in some cases 10, 15 years ago. And so those key questions give me an immediate clue as to how innovative they are or are not. So I ask you to challenge you to ask those questions in your own organization. Now, part of the key to this is having a customer-oriented organization. And that means you reverse the classic organization hierarchical pyramid, which I'll speak about in a moment. A customer-oriented organization says, the most important folks in the organization are the face-to-face staff. because they deal with the customers, they deal with the issues, and they really are the key to innovation. And supervisors have only one job in life, and that is to facilitate the face-to-face staff doing a better job with the customers. And middle managers have one job in life, which is to facilitate supervisors who are able to do a better job helping face-to-face staff meet the customers. It all comes back to face-to-face staff. And of course, in any organization, the director is clearly the least important person. And if you don't believe that, then try this. The director goes away for a 2-week vacation. Tell me how many customers notice. They don't, you know. Now, the face-to-face staff goes away for 2 weeks. You bet they notice. And so customer orientation means we have to we have to touch into the knowledge of those face-to-face staff who deal with people. If there's an old saying that face-to-face staff, frontline managers do, senior managers delegate. And it's the doers who are likely to have most insight into innovation because they interact with the people out there. And so I ask you then to talk about your training programs. And I say, okay, so where does most of your training budget go? Does it go to face-to-face staff? And the answer probably is no. It goes up to the senior managers. Well, we'll talk about how to get face-to-face staff engaged in training programs they can afford later, but that seems to me to be a wrong priority. Many of our students do a semester at Disney World, and they go through the Disney program, which some of you are probably familiar with. The first day at Disney, the whole day is spreading the pixie dust and telling you the heritage of Walt and how it came into being and all the stuff about Mickey and the whole deal. It's the history, the culture of Disney World. Day 2, they take the new people on a tour of all the Disney projects in the Orlando area. So they are knowledgeable about all dimensions of what Disney do. Day 3, they send you with your trainer to your site and you work with your trainer for 2 or 3 or 4 days, shadowing him or her, before finally, after about a week there, they let you loose on the customer. Now translate that back to your context. Do all of your staff know everything that you're doing in the agency? My staff don't. We have 61 parks in my city and a whole bunch of other stuff that we do. Many of the face-to-face staff, for example, our cemetery workers, I went over to our cemetery recently, visited with those workers. They never went outside the cemetery. They had no idea what was going on in the rest of the city. So when people ask them their opinion of something, or their knowledge, they don't know, you know. It's inadequate. We need to expose them to everything, and that way they have a much broader world view of our operation. And so that was my observation. If you're not serving the customer, you'd better be serving someone who is. Another Drucker quote I like, which is all about passion. Whenever anything is being accomplished, it's being done, I have learned, by a monomaniac with a mission. And so I'll come back to this theme later, but change when it is done to you is threatening, and we don't like it. Change when it is done by you is exciting, and we want to implement it. And so it's important that the people down the line who are going to be impacted generate the change. They have ownership of it. They're passionate about it, and then it happens. If it's imposed upon them from the top, it's much less likely to hurt. People will say, oh yes, we'll do it, but they'll do it in a perfunctory way. They won't be excited about it unless they own it. So let's move on to my next point. I've talked about what I mean by innovation, about why it's important, and why so few agencies have a culture. So what are the key elements in creating that culture? Rosabeth Moss-Kanter is a professor at Harvard, and she has done really the pioneering work in the private sector with innovation. and she's had a number of books and so on, and very insightful comments. And so one of Moskanta's conclusions was the degree to which the opportunity to use power effectively is granted to or withheld from individuals is one operative difference between those companies which stagnate and those which innovate. In other words, she's saying, if you give individuals down the line, if you pass out, decentralize what she calls power, and I'll define that in the next slide, then you will get more innovation. If you keep it all centralized, you don't get innovation. And so what are the power tools she's talking about? There are really three power tools. The first is information. So where do you get the sources of new ideas? And I'm going to deal with each of these in turn. The second is resources. Yeah, it's all very well for you to talk about new ideas, but they don't happen unless you have money or resources to implement them. And the third is you need support for those things. And so let me pick them up one at a time. And firstly, the sources of new ideas. So number one source, of course, is clients. I said earlier that I have no faith these days at all in surveys. I'm a big believer in regular focus groups with stakeholders. And I'm insisting on that in my own community. And being on the city council, you have some prerogatives to make some of these things happen. And so each year, I'm expecting our parks department to have at least one meeting with each of the neighborhood associations. We have probably 50 of them in town. I want you to sit down over pizza with a group of those folks, a half a dozen, 7 or 8 of them, and I want you to ask them, what kinds of things should we be doing or not? What should we emphasize? Have you got any ideas of new things we should do? And so on. Around a pizza for 3/4 of an hour to an hour discussion, you get ideas that way. The same with all of these groups, the aquatics groups, the citizens with disabilities, the senior citizens, the external athletics, and in my community, that means the people who put on tournaments and those kinds of things that bring people to town, the recreation centers, the teen centers, the special interests, the environmental groups, the internal athletics, which is the obviously the city groups that use sports fields and so on. You create your own list, but you put it on, you expect what you inspect. You put it on someone's to-do list, and their performance evaluation says, did you do that at the end of the year? And when our city department comes through with their annual report, that's what I'm asking. I said, okay, tell me how, the stakeholders, and tell me the ideas, show me the ideas that came out from those stakeholders as we go on through. And then, of course, there's the non-users of services. You all have these service groups in your community, and these are the movers and shakers in your community usually. They have good networks. They're tied into everybody else in the community. And so the ideas you get from these people are not just their ideas, it's the ideas of the groups that they lead that come forward as well. And you do these stakeholder groups with them. Now, if you've got 30 people in the department, you spread the load across the department. You don't have 1 or 2 people doing this, and then it becomes manageable so that each person has to do 1 group a month or something, and it doesn't become overwhelming. School groups and school leaders and students are another non-user of service that we inspect regularly. Other opportunity suppliers, and of course, I'm sure Marion has these things set up in the Ontario association now, but you have groups of people who are doing recreation centers or doing athletics or doing social art stuff or whatever. They have special groups and they meet once a month or whatever with other people who are doing things. And it's the old wine in new bottles phenomenon that I talked about earlier, is that's how you get ideas. Not just from them, but from tapping into their networks as you go on through here. And then, of course, you've got your own personnel, which is something we're going to talk about in a little bit time and dwell on a little bit. So ideas are the beginning of innovation. Obviously, per se, they're not innovation. You have to put the support and the resources behind them, but that's our starting point. Okay, so let's talk about the second part of the ideas, the information, which is the other power, the second power factor, which is resources. How do I get resources in order to back new programs? We know that, and the answer is, I need slack. I need some slack in my budget, and we'll talk about how to get that slack in my budget. And so we know that innovations oftentimes have a substantial upfront cost. And so where does that come from? How do we get the resources to make that happen? We know, as I said earlier in one of my research questions that I ask, how many times have you failed recently? Because if you're on the edge of innovation, you will have a number of failures. The two go together. Innovations are costly to implement, and you need to pilot test these before you actually put them in. So slack is important. This was a major study done by McKinsey, who are a major consulting outfit, not too long ago in a major city. It was Boston in the United States. The lesson is clear from the cases. Innovation usually costs money. In the long term, it may save money or produce such user benefits worth the added operating costs. However, and this is a key, since local politicians react primarily to immediate pressures, administrative entrepreneurs are advised to find ways to shift costs upward, forward, or under the rug. No politician wants to accept the costs today that will benefit some future politician in the future. They want to have the goodies today and put the costs on politicians in the future. And so how do you get resources when politicians are so reluctant to upfront the cost because it's going to mean a tax increase and that means they're voted out of office? How does that happen? Well, I'm one slide ahead here. So the importance of it is demonstrated in this observation that I actually used at a council meeting last week. Planning is fiction, and it's merely wishful thinking if it doesn't include an allocation of resources. My own city is doing a new comprehensive plan, and I'm frustrated. The planners have got all of these ideas, but my point is the city has no money. You know, I mean, so this is not, and I'm told, well, it's not a roadmap, it's an ideas map. Nonsense. It should be a roadmap. It should be strategic. It should have resources behind it. And so resources are key. How do we get resources? Well, we can create slack resources. Technology is obvious. You know, you can do, obviously, if you have technology doing things, it frees up people's time. These are not so obvious. You know, we place interns, all of our folks have to do students have to do internships. And I'm so disappointed sometimes at the way agencies use interns, that they use them for bottom of the line jobs. These are bright, intelligent people who want to be challenged, and we under challenge them. What's the main reason that volunteers quit volunteering? Because they don't feel challenged, because they're not given exciting things to do. Incidentally, I used to think volunteers were merely a means of getting to an end. And then I started doing studies about what motivated volunteers. And I found it was things like, well, to have social contact, to build self-esteem, to feel valuable. And I compared that list with the motives of people engaging in recreation. And the list of motives was the same. And so I concluded, volunteerism, if it's structured properly, is actually a recreation. It's a recreation, not merely a means to an end, but it means you have to structure it well so they get those benefits out of it. Of course, you can get slack by outsourcing because clearly you don't have the benefit packages when you outsource that the cities have. Sponsorships and friends groups are self-expressive. Many of your staff are overqualified. They can do much more than you're allowing to. But one that I like to talk about a bit because it's underutilized is what I call terminating existing programs. Now, terminating things does not have a positive image. People are very negative towards termination. But if you go back to our diagram, our product life cycle, you see that termination is inevitable. it will happen. And because a product fails, a program fails, a service fails, or not fails, but reaches the end of its life cycle, does not mean the person responsible for it has failed. It's just the natural order of things. Things terminate. And so, I'll skip that. Yes. One of the things I miss about Texas is my rose garden, and I happen to still have a home in my hometown of Liverpool. This is my Liverpool house, which I get over to rarely and is rented, but nevertheless, I really enjoy spending time in my Liverpool house with my roses. And this is my backyard. And one thing you learn about rose growing's in every Brit's blood. I mean, you learn how to grow roses as a nipper, and you just learn. It's just part of who you are. And one of the things you learn about roses is the key to success is you cut them right down to just above the last bud that's on the stalk. In fact, you're left with a little bit of a stalk, and it breaks your heart. I mean, you've got these great big bushes, you're all the way down there. But that's the key. Now, why do I cut my roses all the way back? Well, the answer is because they need light and air and resources to grow. The new shoots do. And if I keep the old stuff on there, the new shoots don't get the light and air they need. And my roses are just like your programs and services. If you don't terminate anything, you don't free up the resources you need to put on the new things. And so terminating things is positive. Terminating is the key to innovation. It frees necessary resources. It stimulates the search for the new that will replace the old. Ideas are nothing without resources. This is a source of resources. So abandoning things is an opportunity. It's not an indicator of failure. And I would argue that the viability of a leisure service agency is as much a function of pairing as it is of proliferating new programs. And again, Peter Drucker spoke eloquently about this in one of his books, and he concluded that failure to abandon is the most damning and common failure of public administrators. It alone guarantees non-performance, and with a fairly short time period. And so abandoning things enables you to concentrate resources on the most important offerings. Enables you to feed services identified as the most important and reduce the resources that you put on those things that are in the petrification stage. Typically, our priority services receive fewer resources than they need because we got too many tied up in those at the end of the life cycle. Many times we make the mistake of saying, we have this program that's not doing very well. Jill is our very best person. Let's put Jill on this program to fix it. No. You put your best people on your highest priority, best programs, because that's how your reputation is made, and that's what's important in the narrative and discussion about your agency. People remember the best and the worst. They don't remember the things in the middle, the mediocre kinds of things. A reduction in the quantity of your offerings does not mean a reduction in total consumer benefits, because those consumer benefits are aggregated in qualitative terms. So the best products, the best programs get more attention, consumer satisfaction goes up. Fewer programs does not mean lower aggregate benefits. There's an old British saying farmers had. My mother came from a farming family. If you spread the muck too thin, nothing grows. If you spread the manure too thin, nothing grows. You have to put a fixed amount on less land in order to get good growth out of it. And then, of course, there's Pareto principle. And if you're not familiar with Mr. Pareto, it governs my life, 2080 law. So Vilfredo Pareto was a 19th century Italian, actually, economist looking at 19th century England. And then Zilp reinvented him sort of in the 1940s with his Principle of Last Effort book. Here's what 2080 law says. A small amount of your, relatively small amount of your input generates a lot of your desired output. So 20% of your services probably give you 80% of your needed repositioning focus. In other words, 20%, if in my community, we promote parks and recreation, we position it as an economic generator in our community. Well, 20% of our services get us to that goal. 20% of your services generate 80% of your community support. 20% of your employees generate 80% of your productivity. 20% of the world's population, 80% of the world's energy, use 80% of the world's energy. 20% of the world's population use 80% of its wealth. 20%, and so on and so forth. 20% of books' contents, 80% of its value. In my case, 20% of the students give me 80% of the problems. And it's probably true of your workforce also. And so a small amount of input generates a relatively large output. And so this has tremendous implications. The first one is that all employees, services, phone calls, friends are not of equal value. The second, pertaining directly to our jobs, is why do we continue to deliver 80% of our services that generate only 20% of public support or customer satisfaction or revenues or whatever output measure is? Now, remember, these are rules of thumb. It might be 85-15 or 65-35 or whatever. They're rules of thumb. But generally, it's true that you've got a long tail at the end, which generates relatively little in terms of desirable outputs from your outfit. And this is wonderful news, because the key to finding resources for innovation is not to find more resources. It's to use existing resources smarter. Here's the reality of our world. As a politician, there's no way in parks and recreation I'm going to free up more resources for my city. I can't. If I raise taxes, I'm done, out of business, not a chance of surviving the next election. And so we're going to be short of money. We're going to have much less property taxes, sales tax, and all the rest of it as a result of COVID. I'm not going to cut police and fire. That's my first obligation, is to make the community safe. So police and fire aren't going to get cut. It's parks and recreation and similar so-called discretionary programs that are going to get chopped. And so they're going to have to find more internal resources. It's no use saying to your politicians, give us more. It ain't going to happen. You've got to find those slack resources within your operation. And a primary way is termination. And so my third point, power element here, beyond selecting ideas and creating slack to get resources to implement those ideas, is obviously you need the support of senior management and supervisors. And so this is an interesting issue, and it revolves around the notion of what Burns and Stalker years ago called organic and mechanistic structures. Most of us, unfortunately, work in what I call mechanistic structures. Now, there are differences between leaders and managers. Leaders do all of these things in the management column, but they have a different view, a different way of doing it. Leaders have a long-range vision. They're looking at what's the agency going to be like in 5 years or whatever, and how do we get there. Managers, they're hung up on this year's annual report or what they can show their bosses they're doing now. Leaders challenge the status quo. Yes, I know we're okay right now, but we've got to look ahead and we got to bring some new things in. Managers just accept the status quo. Leaders original, innovate, and develop. Managers maintain. Leaders inspire and motivate. If you don't get excited about stuff, why should your staff or anybody around you get excited? Managers, they administer stuff. Leaders ask why and what. Managers say, okay, how do I do it? When do you want it doing? Leaders, their own people, they speak out if they feel necessary. Managers are good soldiers. Now, let me say, ladies and gentlemen, by leaders, I'm not talking about the CEO. I'm talking about everybody in the organization who has a supervisory role down here can be a leader, or everybody in the organization can content themselves with being a manager. We work, many of us, in mechanistic, multi-tiered bureaucratic organizations. They have, they're hierarchical. Senior management at the top of these organizations, the director makes all the decisions. And as we saw earlier in our inverted pyramid, those are the people who are least in contact with the clientele and least able to do that. Mechanistic organizations, those pyramids, there's segmentation. We all live in our own silos. We don't talk to anybody else, or if we do talk to them, we send them an email to the next office. We compartmentalize, we depersonalize. It's not about people's talents, it's about who has what position that determines their power. And it's very rigid. Emphasis is on following the rules and standard procedures, which are set down for performing tasks. So not too long ago, my political enemies in this community got after me. They said to the president of the university, Crompton's on television every Thursday afternoon, and it's televised across the community, and he's a state employee, and clearly he's stealing money from the state because he's not working for Texas A&M University, and so you need to fire him. I get a call from the president of the university. He says, Dr. Crompton, I have to put an internal audit on you because I've received a formal complaint. Internal audits are not pleasant. Their mission in life is to find things that are wrong. That's what they're hired to do. Ferret out corruption, those sorts of things. And I'm subject to this. So we have the internal audit. And so they come in and they say things like, well, we hear that you're not here on a Thursday afternoon. And we hear that sometimes you're not here at 8 in the morning. You don't get here till 9. Sometimes you even stay at home. And so clearly you deserve to be fired. And Crompton's reaction is, but I'm the most productive guy in the department. I do the most trainings. I publish the most work. My work's cited more than anybody else, and I get the highest teaching evaluations. But that's not a concern. They're concerned about rules, procedures, and performing tasks. They're not concerned about outputs. That's a mechanistic organization. Obviously, I survived that trauma because I'm still kicking around here. And so if that's your modus operandi in your organization, then you don't get innovation. Your challenge is to structure it what we call organically. In a mechanistic organization, there are too many levels where people can say no. So the face-to-face worker has an organization, has an idea, says it to the supervisor, says no, it goes no further. Or else it goes to the next level, no, goes no further. And if it does get all the way up to the top, it's like the party game where somebody on one side of the room whispers somebody's ear to the next person. By the time it gets to the end of the room, it's a totally different project than when it started. And so what do you do if you work in that kind of mechanism organization? Well, you know, I'm a supervisor here, a frontline supervisor. I have people who work under me, graduate students and so on. And I say to them, okay, we're not going to fuss about the rules. We're going to do this stuff. And then we're just going to plead ignorance and forgiveness if somebody catches us doing it. We're not going to be inhibited by all of this nonsense up here. So you have to do your best within that to create a much freer structure, and provided they don't find out what you're doing on some of these things. And you know, the director's at headquarters and you're in a recreation center 5 miles away, she's never going to know. So you do these things until somebody calls you on it, and then you say, oh, terribly sorry, won't do that again, and you move on. But most of the time they don't call you. So as Peter Drucker again said, most of what we call management consists of making it difficult for people to get their work done. And that's the mechanistic problem of mechanistic organizations. You're hamstrung. You're not given the flexibility to move forward. The alternative is where we need to be, an organic agency, the team. It's not about individuals, it's the team, which is loosely structured. We're not in a pyramid, it's loosely structured. There's frequent interaction between colleagues. In other words, we meet each other at the drinking fountain and we talk. We don't send emails to the guy next door. We create situations where we interact. People participate in the decision process. It doesn't come down from on high, and it's not one of these things that come from on high and you're demanded to participate in the process. You generate it from low levels. There's maximum individual discretion. You need a team. You get input from others. You share rewards and responsibility. And here's Rosabeth Moskanter again. A common characteristic of less innovating companies was the virtual absence of lateral cooperation or communication and support across areas. In other words, she said, we all live in our silos and we don't cross areas. Again, Moskanter. All any company has to do to explore its own potential to become a more innovating organization is to see what happens when employees and managers are brought together and given a significant problem to tackle along with the power tools, that is, the information, the resources, and the support to help them meet the challenge. There's a ton of creativity in your organization waiting to be unleashed, but it's a bottom-up phenomenon. It's not a top-down phenomenon. It's the bottom-up generating the things. You know, I went to my city manager and I'm trying to get implemented in College Station, our program I call STICKS, S-T-I-C-K-S. So it's support ideas, new ideas in College Station, something like that. I forgot the acronym is. But the idea is that 1,000 employees, every one of them is required to come up with 2 new ideas this year. You build it into the performance review. Every department does it. And each department's responsible for identifying the ideas that come up and what they did with them. And we mandate it, and we're going to mandate it, I hope. I got to get the city manager on the side. I'm going to mandate it, I hope, and then stuff happens. And so the energy and excitement that are unleashed, the ideas that come bubbling forth and zest for work that suddenly appears in employees who look like dead wood, indicate there's huge entrepreneurial spirit to be tapped in most organizations. And so, is this what characterizes your organization? These are the organic traits that facilitate innovation: teamwork, consensus, communication, a sense of a person's value. It's the people, not the position. Management's present, available, deals with people on the spot. You don't make an appointment to see them in 2 days. Willingness to listen, non-defensiveness. Are you willing to let go of your own ideas and embrace the different ideas that might give different results? I want to hire people with a diversity of backgrounds. I want to avoid functional myopia, which means if you hire from the same background, you view people from the same perspective and reference points. Everybody from the same background sees the wall and can't find a way over it. If I hear people from different backgrounds, different disciplinary backgrounds, I can find a way over the wall because we have different ways of addressing the issue. And one of the things, bugs that gets me, the National Recreation and Park Association. I'm a supporter of the organization, but some of the things they do drive me nuts. But one of the things is they want people to be hired if they've got a certificate in, a certification in parks and recreation, whatever. Yes, I want some of those people, but I also want people who have no background in this field, but have terrific technology tales or terrific social skills or whatever. You know, I want a variety of perspectives, not everybody coming from the same area. Differences in background stimulate constructive conflict between colleagues and cross-fertilization of ideas. And so I'm going to have Marion on my back here because I'm running short of time. So excuse me if I skip a few things here. Change can be friend or foe. As I said earlier, it's disturbing when it's done to us, but it's exhilarating when it's done by us. Innovating organizations provide the freedom to act, which arouses the desire to act. excuse me while I rage through a few here because Marion will be all over me if I don't. What about employee morale? People who are satisfied with their jobs are more committed. A paycheck keeps them on the job, but it won't keep a person on the job emotionally. You've got to have a reason to get up in the morning. People need to have a cause. Serving others as we do is demanding and frustrating to be done well. We've got to have a belief and a passion in what we do. And it's not about exhortation, telling people what they do. It's about role modeling what we do. We give out awards. If you're going to give out awards, don't give me a $1 certificate from Walmart. Make them attractive awards. And make sure they get lots of visibility on the website. And the frontline workers who don't get much sometimes get acknowledgement and get some sense of community accomplishment and visibility as a result of the award. Use the award to leverage their visibility in the community and make them feel good. And so here's my survey. It's a simple survey every year that you put into the organization. What do you like about your job? What don't you like about your job? What stops you from doing the very best job you can? Those go anonymously to the director who looks at them, and you get all kinds of clues on things you can do to up your morale. So what are your morale boosters? What do you do in your organization? Well, you have family events, you have fitness programs, and you have flexi time. You have maximum opportunities with senior managers. You have employee of the month, week, quarter, or whatever. You have focus groups with staff to get their input on stuff. You use people's names. You know them all. You say thank you notes, and you use handwritten thank you notes. You don't just type a response on email and cut and paste it. You involve people in your decisions. You help them grow, job enlargement, and you have job rotation. And so not too long ago, I went to visit a state park only to find the director of state parks behind the counter on a Saturday at this particular state park, giving out the campsite reservations. I said, Andy, what are you doing here? He said, I got to understand how the people, face-to-face people's work. I got to have some understanding of that. So I do this 3 or 4 times a year. I go into a park and I play face-to-face workers so I understand the issues. And that boosts the morale of the rest of the staff when they see you doing that. Let me skip a few here because I've got to, let me speak to this one. You've got 3 options every day you come forward in terms of innovation. One, you can do nothing new. You're not going to be criticized. As I said, managers do what they've always done, and nobody's going to criticize them. You do something new, and you succeed. Well, that was nice, Jill. It's nice that you did that new thing, but of course, that's part of your job, innovation and so on. We're pleased to see it. Well done. You do something new and you fail. You idiot. You failed. You put our name on the front side of the paper and given those 3 options, which do you take? Well, you take number 1, because the rewards for innovation are outdone by the penalties for failure. You have to accept failure as being acceptable. So, ladies and gentlemen, you look at those numbers, and I ask an audience, I don't have a live audience today, so I can't do it. What do you see with those numbers? And some people say, Crompton, if you look at the second number, if you look at the middle number on the top, 5 plus 4, it doesn't equal 7. And if you go to the next number, 9 plus 6, it doesn't equal 13. And it makes me very sad that I got 2 of my sums wrong. But then somebody in the audience will say, Crompton, you got number 1 on the left and all 3 on the bottom right. Yes, I'm so excited. I got things right. And you noticed. And of course, you see the issue. We tend to concentrate on the things people get wrong instead of focusing on the things they get right. Marion, I promise 5 more minutes and I'll quit. And so in the private sector, the proportion of new products and services which fail ranges from 35 to 90. We got a ton of these studies, and it depends what ROI you're using and which industry you're in. There's a very wide range. But if those guys, with all of their market research, fail between 1/3 and 90% of the time, what chance have you got? Of course you're going to fail. It goes with the territory. But we celebrate failure. And I like Thomas Edison. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 words that won't work, ways that won't work. If you do something and failed, you're vastly better off than if you tried to do nothing and succeeded. And as I said earlier, if a manager, you don't generate excitement, you don't generate much. And so I'm running short of time here. And so let me finish then with these couple of slides. How do you train your frontline staff? You haven't got the money to send them to fancy programs and stuff. Here's some ideas I've picked up from visiting with agencies around the country. You put 3 to 5 people in a car, different people from different silos in your agency, and you send them to another agency to spend a day with the people who do exactly the same job or a similar job in the other agency. And 2 things happen. And so the mandate to them is you bring back 2 ideas they do better than us. 2 things happen when you do this. First of all, people within your own agency are stuck in a car together and stuck together for a day. And so they learn about each other's jobs and they build a network and camaraderie. And number 2, of course, is you get the ideas, the best practices from another agency. They come back to you and you say, yes, we'll do that. No, we won't for these reasons, or give me 2 days to think about it and I'll get back to you. And we've made progress. You've got DVDs for training programs. Professionals don't like to read, but all of us can read a book chapter and come together at the end of the month and say what the chapter said and share the insights for our agencies. The best people in the agency who are good at what they do programs for new folks. We can have webinars and several organizations offer those. Private sector companies train your people, you know, in customer service and all of this thing. We have in our community, we bring in the Hilton people to train our concessions folks and so on. Conference call seminars, things like this. Employees of the system tour all elements of it, say every 3rd year, so they're aware of everything that's going on, and so on. So remember, creating this corporate climate for innovation takes years. It's not something that can be done quickly. And so start now in your area of responsibility. Effective leaders are those who know how to maximize the talents of those below them, who know that it's the people below them who are going to make them think good. They don't have the monopoly on talent. Build accountability into it with regular review. And lots of people have creativity. They're waiting for you to facilitate the environment that will enable them to translate it into innovation. So with great trepidation, Marion, I apologize for going 10 minutes over, and I turn it back to you and Tracy.
Thank you, John. It's Tracy here again. That was great. A lot of great information. We actually have we have a couple questions. We have time for 1 question, but we will make sure that the other question is answered and sent when we update everything. But the 1 question for you, John, is there a specific aspect of recreation that you are working on changing in your community? And if so, what ideas do you plan to implement them?
Yeah, there are a couple of things we're working on. One of the things is we have to, as I look forward at our field of parks and recreation, in the United States anywhere, there is more public support for parks than there has been since the 1930s. It's incredible. The politicians are behind the curve on that. Although I will say that 3 months ago, this Congress, which has been so inept in being polarized, passed the biggest conservation legislation that's been passed in 50 years. They passed the Great America's Outdoors Bill, which put in $10 billion immediately for federal programs and built in another $1 billion a year for state and local programs forever. I mean, incredible in that. So there's tremendous support for parks. Recreation's a different animal. There is much less support for public recreation. The reason for that is that the private sectors and the nonprofits are now doing much of the stuff that we used to do. There is certainly much less support for tax subsidized recreation unless you're doing it in at-risk youth areas, and then you have a rationale for it. But the idea that cities are, in the United States anyway, are going to subsidize middle-class recreation, that's going out through the window. And so what's happening, and what I'm trying to get in our community, is we are pulling out of the recreation business, and we're helping the people in those recreation areas to form clubs, helping them get organized. And so we will provide the facility for them, but they will have to organize, do all the programming. It's what I call co-production. The city will be the provider of amenities, but the programming, which traditionally recreation agencies did, will disappear. That will be done by nonprofits increasingly. So those are the two major trends that I see.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, John, for that. At this time, I'm going to turn it back to Marion to wrap everything up. So, Marion?
Yeah, and thanks, John. And John, I was not watching the clock at all, just so you know.
Of course you were.
Just so you know, I have worked with John over the years a number of times, and he's such an engaging speaker, and just love to hear him talk. He has a wealth of information. It's like being at the foot of a guru listening to you, John. I think your piece about at the end about the parks and the return to the parks, very interesting, because recently our some commentaries on how we've handled COVID has indicated that where we closed parks initially and trails initially, that was probably one of the less constructive things that we could have done, because it could have given people a lot of opportunity still to have community and still to be healthy and active. So thank goodness our parks are open and they will not be closing again. It does not sound like, even though some of the areas of the province have retracted a little bit. The second piece that you mentioned, which is has to do with the community groups, working with those community groups. Here we call that community development, and we have some communities that are highly involved in it, some that do a hybrid model, and some that have not yet embarked on it. So very interesting to hear that that's what's happening in your community, because when we actually think of, for example, the number of sport organizations in the province, tax base could not afford to do the work that they do. And for the most part, many parks and recreation departments are partners in that, provide exactly what you say, will provide the facilities or otherwise, but you do the programming. So good to hear that that we've got a little bit of a head start on some of those pieces, but good to reinforce where we perhaps are not actually doing that yet. It may be something that we want to do. So John, wonderful to see you again and be with you. Really appreciate it. And just in wrapping up, we've just got a couple of resources that we'd like to share, and they are our essential tools, which is Parks and Recreation Ontario's COVID resource page, also the Principles of Healthy Child Development online training, as well as our Canadian Parks and Recreation national database called The Bench. And we'll be hearing a little bit about that tomorrow, because in tomorrow's session, we have Beyond COVID Parks and Recreation Trends. This is a session sponsored by our title sponsor, Perfect Mind. In addition to Perfect Mind, we actually have the president of the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association and one of the directors of that association speaking to these trends. So we hope you can join us at 2 o'clock tomorrow. And again, a very big thank you to Perfect Mind. And thank you to everybody for staying with us. John, again, thank you. Wonderful. And thanks to your technical support, Zach. Zach, we really appreciate your help. So we'll say goodbye now, and hope everyone has a safe and healthy day. Bye now.